All right, perfect. We got a few more people coming in. Look at Colorado Springs, Jacksonville Beach, Greenville. Perfect. Okay, so if we had to list out the order, so today for those that just joined, we're going to talk about scaling properties. So if you're gonna look into purchasing your own property or arbitraging your own property, this is kind of the process you want to go into. Whether you know, go through a program like this where you're doing this by yourself, let's just go through the steps. First thing that I like to look into is regulations. Regulations as number one. I'm going to write these in the chat. And then I look at market performance. I look at regulations first because what I've noticed a lot is if I start off with looking at the market, like this is, if you have markets in mind, this is totally fine. But if you're just going through and you're determining, okay, out of all 50 states and, hundreds of cities, where should I start? I like to get a list of markets that have, friendly regulations first and go from there. I don't look at market performance first because what you notice is that a lot of the time in markets that don't have regulations or that do have regulations, really strict ones, it'll look like there's a lot of opportunity. It'll look like, oh, maybe they used to allow short-term rentals and now they don't. So there's a ton of properties because it's so uh, hard to get into. They're doing really well. So you're like, great, all these properties doing really well. Investability is good. All that kind of information is good. Demand is good. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, regulations have been shut down there for the last 4 years. That's why the people that are currently there are still doing so well. I come across that more often than I do if I'm just looking at markets than if I look at regulations first and then I go and look at the market after. So regulations, market performance kind of like saturation in the market. So as properties come into the market, is the revenue increasing or is it staying stagnant or is it decreasing? Is there enough money for as many properties are coming into the market? Next would be start looking at properties, identifying what would make a good property in this market. Depending on a lot of people have different preferences. This could be, some people are looking for the top property. How can I get the top property in this market? How can I make a property that makes 100,000, 150,000, $200,000 and really compete with the top 10% of properties. And then there's people who are just like, I don't care. It doesn't have to be, the top property. It just needs to be cash flowing. Or some people don't even care about that. Some people it just needs to pay itself because they're doing it for a tax write-off. So everyone has different reasons for doing this, but we'll talk about it as if we're trying to be the best property. That's the goal. So saturation and then identifying um, what's the top properties, what makes a top 10% property? Makes a top 10% property in that market. So once I identify that, then I go into, Zillow or Hotpad or any of those sites, and I'm like, okay, now I need to go look at those specific properties. We're going to go through this together. I'm just going to break it down in a list here. Let me go through Zillow and find those properties. And then next, try to determine, okay, if if I think a property can make 150,000, what does that mean in purchase price? After, expenses, management, the cash flow that I'm looking for, everything like that, how expensive can this house be? A lot of the time, what I notice, and this is a really rough number, but if you want your property to make 150,000, or you think it can based on the comps, then how do I do this? Yeah. So divide that by point 0.2, so 20%, and 750,000. If you want to make 150,000, typically we divide that by point 0.2. 750,000 is the max you're going to want to go on a property. That kind of gives you a rough idea. That 20%, kind of gives you the expenses, and property management is inclusive of property management and things. Those are the numbers that if I'm looking at really rough numbers. Okay, and then so I'll find those properties. Okay, I might have to add more to that. So first thing, let's look at first one on here is Colorado Springs. So I'm gonna screen share and let's take a look at regulations. And I just Google what's, are the short-term regulations in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And so a lot of time at first, especially if I'm talking about a property to purchase, then I will just kind of Google or chat GBT what the regulations are, give them a breakdown. And then once I determine like, okay, this is a market I really want to be into and I really want to understand more, that regulations look decent, performance looks good, then I'll probably dig more into regulations and start going and looking into the fine print. A lot of the time I call the city because if they only have, 100-page documents of all of their codes, then I'm not going to understand or read through that. So I just call the city directly or I email them, try to get them to give me like, hey, this is going to be okay. Anything less than 28 days is okay, or whatever the rules are. I like to try to get that in writing. So in Colorado Springs, you're required to obtain a short-term rental permit for rentals under 29 days, which is valid for 1 year and must be renewed. Property must meet specific use standards. Owner needs a sale tax license and proof of insurance. There's no statewide regulations. So these local rules are specific to the city of Colorado Springs. So it already says that short-term rentals are allowed in this area. The next one, depending on if you're doing arbitrage or purchasing a property, for arbitrage, a lot of markets will say that um, it must be like owner. How does it word it? Like occupied by owner or something like that. It'll say like basically that the owner has to be in the property and can rent out the property that they're in, or that they can, they have the right to rent out short-term rental their property that is their primary residence. That's what it is. It has to be your primary residence. So if you're purchasing a property, then it's trying to you know, make it look like you live in that property, having your mail sent there, things like that. If you're arbitraging the property, it's really hard to, you really have to get the owner on board with that. So that one's a little bit harder when you're doing arbitrage, and typically I steer away from that. Permit is tied to the owner, not the property, and will transfer if the property is sold. So in this case, in Colorado Springs, you would have to get the owner to apply for the permit. Uh, You have just understanding that you have to get a certificate for safety standards, tax ID, insurance. Okay. Anyways, then you keep going through here and identifying the things. So it looks like Colorado Springs does allow short-term rentals. So next thing we want to look at is AirDNA at Colorado Springs. Goodness. Okay, so you guys have probably noticed that AirDNA, if you guys have AirDNA now, looks a little bit different. For those that don't have AirDNA, it's one of those things that it's not necessary to have if you only have one property and you don't intend to scale or anything, it's probably not necessary to have. If you intend to scale and you're, interested in doing property research and looking at multiple markets and finding what the revenue is for the properties around you, it's well worth having. I personally am in this every single day. For every property I do pricing on when I first started, so I'm looking at finding their comps on AirDNA. I look at lead times through here, seasonality. I compare a lot of the information from AirDNA to Price Labs as well. I think they're both fantastic, but I try to use both to get the same information because neither are 100% correct. So I think for the plan, like I pay for a pro plan myself. It, I believe, actually, I shouldn't even say how much it is because I don't know. I want to say it's like 700 a year, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's worth it if you intend to find your next property. So performance. So this 51 score doesn't really mean a lot to me. I've seen a lot of markets that'll say they have 90, 100 scores on their score, but the information is like incorrect. It'll be in places like Green Bay, Wisconsin, where they're claiming a bunch of properties are making a ton of money, but the data is extremely inaccurate for that location due to this harsh seasonality. So in this case, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at revenue, but I'm not looking at the number. I'm just looking at that it's increasing 2% per year. Okay, so that's one indicator, and I'm comparing that to active listings in the area. So active listings are increasing by 3% in this last year, but yet revenue is only increasing 2% in this last year. So that tells me the market is not being able to hold up with as many properties that are coming into the market. So what's going to happen is all the properties that are currently in is your ADR, your average daily rate is just going to start to come down because there's just not enough travel coming to the area to be able to support as many properties as are coming into the market. Now, this is definitely not terrible, and only being 1% down, I would keep an eye on it. I would probably look more into the history. I would look more into regulations. I would look more into property prices to really understand, like, okay, where is this market going? Because this is very close. Next thing, I like to understand seasonality. What am I getting myself into? What is it going to look like throughout the year? Am I interested in being in a very even keel seasonality where across the board I'm getting pretty consistent revenue? Or am I accepting that maybe my spring times and my summertime are going to be really high in revenue and I'm going to have a really hard time for the, next 4 months? Or like in, Arizona, in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, you have February, March, April, absolutely fantastic. June, July, dead, dead. Your high season is going to cover your low season. But in places like San Antonio, it's across the board pretty even throughout the entire year. Neither of them are bad. People are making tons of money in both places. Just what are you comfortable with? So come down here. Technically, this is under the RevPAR section, but I use this as a seasonality calendar. Uh, dark purple is going to be the higher RevPAR, and then light purple is the lower end. It's just telling me, okay, dark purple, people are making more money because it's higher seasonality, lower money here. So obviously, Colorado is going to be slower in the winter months until it starts to hit, ski season. I'm not personally familiar with how close this is to how much skiing there is in this area, but a lot of the time, especially if you're in the Arvada, Denver area, what you'll notice is a slow January, February, March, halfway, and then you start getting into March, April, May being ski season. And then you hit summertime. Just for expectation purposes, it's good to know your season before getting into it. Because it would be terrible to look into, I don't know, a bunch of properties to find out that you're not even accepting, like, okay, I'm not prepared to handle having to cover the costs of this property for a few months of the year. Next thing is understanding lead time. I think these are really important to understand. Saturation in the market, so how many properties are coming into the market versus how much revenue is increasing, seasonality, and then lead time. For lead time, a lot of people go into Airbnbs and they think they're going to be booked out for the next 6 months. Airbnb is a very known thing where it's a very last minute industry. Airbnb as a platform itself is the most last minute platform out of Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking, and all of those other sites. Its lead time as an average, I believe, is 30 days. Like if they would take everything, every market, every property across the board is about 30 days is their lead time altogether. So, and every market's different from that. You know, there's very vacation markets where people do book out really far in advance and you're not going to get any last minute bookings, or it could be the opposite. So in this case, what I like to look at is kind of like it's the light blue, it's the baby blue down there. Out of throughout most of the year, what can I expect for last minute bookings? And in this case, if you were to average out, what I'm looking at is the 0 to 6%. You know, it says 26% right now, 39%, 32%. So if I were to average this out, it'd probably be, I don't know, let's say 32%. So expecting that about 32% of your bookings are going to come last minute. Nothing is wrong with that at all, but it's just setting expectations when you're going into this market. Along with lead time, we can look at occupancy. So obviously when you go through here too, make sure you do filters. I normally talk about this, but days available, only looking at information that's been provided by, properties that are available more than 180 days and have more than 20 reviews. AirDNA has a lot of really bad data and a lot of really good data. So just filter it so you're only looking at the really good data. And then looking at, you know, the market as a whole. If you're not looking at studios that all are really large homes, then I try to keep the range within reason. And at this point, we haven't looked yet at what makes a top property in this area. So I'm just looking at a couple basic information that for me to set expectations for myself of what am I getting into if I get into this market. So on average, occupancy in this market is about 64%. Most people in this program have more understanding of how pricing strategy works, optimizing your occupancy, things like that. So you're probably going to be 5 to 10% above the market average. So we're probably looking at more 70% as average. Again, a lot of people come in to short-term rentals and think that they should have 100% for the next 6 months. In reality, to really maximize every night, you're looking at just trying to be 5 to 10% above the market. That's what you're looking at. Because that's keeping your value, keeping your ADR where it should be. So, but then looking at it month by month just to understand, okay, when are my, months higher versus lower? Obviously, January is going to be your lowest month in this area, July being your highest month. So understanding expectations. And yep, Dana said that in Bradenton, they're in a slow stretch. And typically in Florida, September, October are going to be your slowest months due to the hurricane season. Except for in places with football season, then they do really well. Okay. I don't really look at too many of these other stats, mostly so saturation, looking at the seasonal calendar, lead time, and occupancy. Those are setting expectations for myself. Next, I'm going to go to top short-term rental properties. And so I've got my filters spread out pretty far. We technically could go as far as we can open this up all the way. Okay. Calm down. There. But all the way, I don't think anybody's looking at studios here. If we're looking at houses, we're probably looking at least one bedroom minimums. So in this market, Colorado Springs, it looks like there's $1 million homes making 300,000. I'm not really going to look at those homes because I don't know personally many people that are kind of a lot of the time. How do I say this? I very, very, very rarely see $1 million home or multi-million dollar homes cash flowing. And a lot of the people that have these kind of homes are looking for tax write-offs. Now, obviously, I would go through and to identify if that's, I guess I don't know how much these are, but I'm imagining these are, 5+ million-dollar homes. And even at 300,000, you're not cash flowing. So, anyways, I don't think most people in here are kind of looking at those homes. Most of the time, based on everyone I've talked to, I think the max that we're looking at is we're looking at homes that are probably going to produce a little bit under 200,000. And when you're looking at that range, you're wanting a property probably under 850 to 900,000. So let's go and look. Okay, so if we wanted to be in this market, and let's say you have a budget of, you know, 800,000, then we're going to identify. So if we look at, let's say our budget's 800,000 and times 0.2%, it's 160,000. So if we're going to have if we're gonna have an $800,000 home, we need to make at least 160,000 is a very, very rough estimate of what we need to make. So in order to get that, these properties here, there's not a lot of properties making more than that. So that tells me we probably want to bring down, we probably don't want to go that high. I want to look closer to that between 500 to $700,000 range. But anyways, let's identify what these have in common. So something I like to look at is location. Let me move this. Okay. So locations in this area, sometimes I'll just go through and slide my mouse over each of these properties, because as you can see on the right side, when it loads, it'll pinpoint where that property is. Oh, we want to go back down to the 100, this range. So what I'm trying to identify is if all of these properties that are making this much revenue, are they all in one location in this area? Are they all on the north, east side? Are they all on the southwest side? Where are they? If they are very sporadic all around the city that you're looking at, that tells me that people are not as concerned about specific area as they are of just finding a good property. So in this case, let's go through some of these. These are pretty sporadic. But what I am noticing is, let's see, but all of the properties are kind of up towards, this area, and none of them are on the south side of this Colorado Springs. So now if I were to go to Zillow or anything like that and look for properties, I'm going to make sure I'm pretty much looking at, anywhere north of downtown. I'd probably keep my line north of downtown. There's no point to look down here because a majority of I would keep going looking through these, but a majority of the properties seem to be in this north of downtown area. Okay, so let's figure out what else they have in common. Exit out of this. Okay, so in this case, the properties that are these higher $100,000 ranges, they seem a little bit remote. They definitely don't seem to have, a majority of them do not have next door neighbors. They seem to have a view and they hold a lot of people. So there's 6, 7 bedroom homes, 5 bedroom homes. There's a couple of fours, but a majority, especially when you're that 150,000 and up, you're like 5 bedroom minimum or 5 bedroom plus. And as you can tell, a majority of them have a really nice view. So bare minimum, if you're looking in Colorado Springs and you're wanting a property that makes more than 150,000, then you need to be looking at a property that holds at least 5 bedroom, has 5 bedrooms plus, holds probably 14 plus people, has some sort of view or property that people can hang out at. And if you click into each one, I'm sure they probably have hot tubs and other experiences as well. So those to me, when you're looking at those kind of properties are non-negotiable. You can't go and try to compete with them and not have at least those three things. You can't come in with a 3 bedroom and expect, you know, to compete with a 5, 6, 7 bedroom and not have a view and think that you're going to make 150,000 plus. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so let's look at something a little bit more reasonable. Let's try to find some that are in town. It's not going to load fast enough to show. Anyways, so for some of these that are between that 100,000 to under that 150, I'd identify where they are, of course, identify what size they are. And for anytime you get a property, you want to have at least 3 comps. So trying to find, so just because you can see that there is a few 4 bedrooms, if there is not at least a couple, ugh, you still want those 4 bedrooms. Like if you're looking at 4 bedrooms, you want them to be, you know, try to find 3 in this area or 3 in this area or 3 over here. You don't want to find one here, one here, one here. Those are completely different. I say not completely different markets, but obviously completely different locations. And even though people are willing to go anywhere for a good property, that's still a little too spread out for comps for my comfort zone. So I would still try to keep it within the same region. If you're looking in the Northwest, I would try to keep your comps in the Northwest. But we definitely know in this area, larger homes hold a lot of people, either have a view, have a hot tub. I've seen a couple with a pool. There's definitely a handful of them with a bedroom with game rooms. So they're looking for pretty luxury homes in this location if you're looking to be in this top 10%. And when I say top 10%, there's 100 or 1,800 listings that we're looking at right now. And we've only looked at, maybe 100 that we've scrolled through. So you're still beyond within the top 10%. Just because keep scrolling does not mean we're not. So then let's go to Zillow. So now we know we want a larger home. We want it in the north side of Colorado Springs. We're just going to go right off the bat. I'd say 5 bedroom. If we're going to look at 5 bedrooms, you want it to at least, if I was going to purchase, I'd want it to have at least three bathrooms or more. I might do 2 bathrooms if I'm going to do an arbitrage, but purchase, I'm doing 3 minimum, especially because we intend to have, 14 guest capacity, 16 guest capacity. We're looking at houses, and then I want to create my own boundary here. And at this point, we probably know we're trying to look for houses that are under 700,000. I always like to look from low to high. Okay, so let's look at some of these homes. So we know too, HOAs when he looks for arbitrage are not something we try to stay away from HOA with arbitrage. When you're purchasing a property, HOAs comes with a lot of pros and cons, right? It's great because you're going to be in a nice, clean neighborhood that has a standard. And then if you are, but also going to give you a hard time because they're not going to like transient people in their neighborhoods either. I like the idea of this property because it looked like it had a little bit of a view possibly. Has a huge yard. Obviously, there's a lot more properties to go through when you're looking to purchase. You just have to keep going through them. This one's in great condition. Definitely looks like it can accommodate 16 guests. Updated kitchen. In almost every market, when you are looking at properties that are making more than $100,000 as well, is they almost always have, game rooms or theater rooms or some kind of big experience within the property as well. So in this case, a lot of these homes, I would just have to go through them, each of them, because a lot of them look like amazing. Yeah, if it were me, I would just go through each of these and determine what kind of an experience can you give the guest here? Can you provide games? Can you put a hot tub there? Do they offer some sort of view? They don't have to have a view, but it's always a plus. Um, and just keep going through these homes. So then obviously, once you've done that, you've come across some properties, then that's when you start to really add in the underwriting. Determine all of your expenses, how much is you're gonna have to put into the property right away when it comes to like how much is it going to cost to do a little bit of a rehab if you have to update the property. What is it going to cost to add the design? The I don't know. Are you going to add a pickleball court? Are you going to add a hot tub? Like, what are you going to add to it? How much is that going to cost? Determine how much you can potentially make per year. I like to find. I say minimum of 3 comps, but if you can find 6 and really determine like a low, medium, high to really set expectations for yourself. That's kind of the last step is the underwriting. And then, yeah, that'd be kind of the next step. And after that, you put an offer. Okay. So I talked a lot about Colorado Springs. Let's talk about um, Jacksonville Beach, Florida. Uh, Okay, they do not ban short-term rentals, but require owners to adhere to state laws, obtain a land use permit, pay local tax and fees to apply for a permit through the city. So it looks like they do allow short-term rentals. What's really nice about using ChatGPT for this as well is if you ask it to, if you prompt it, it'll look into any evidence of regulations being banned. So if there's talk about it, if they're making regulations stricter, a lot of the time ChatGPT can find that information and can give you the down low on it. Okay, so it looks like they are allowed in Jacksonville. I like when it tells me how, so here's the rental application. Return rentals, owner occupied dwelling units. 50%. Okay, so we determined that Jacksonville Beach allows short-term rentals. So let's look on it on here. Okay, I just sent those like 6 steps that you want to go through if you're looking for a property. So Jacksonville Beach, hopefully this is the right area. I'm not super familiar with this. So far it looks good. So first thing, saturation. Let me move all this stuff out of the way. So it's up 1% in annual revenue. Properties coming into the area, down 2%. So properties are actually decreasing this last year than the year prior, but revenue is going up. So that's definitely a good sign. Next thing, let's look at RevPAR. We're not actually looking at RevPAR, looking at seasonality. So seasonality in this area, make sure my filters are good. Okay, seasonality in this area looks to be a lot. I mean, this is very typical Florida. So September being a very, very slow month, then it picks up a little bit for the holidays. January is kind of an odd month, and then February, March, April tend to be the highest revenue months in Florida, and then summertime is still pretty good when it comes to occupancy. But as you can see, even if you look at the RevPAR, the rates for March, even though they are dark purple and July's dark purple, but the rates are significantly higher than they are, not significantly, they're quite a bit higher than they are in January or July. Sorry. So then let's look at a pretty even keel seasonality. Let's look at lead time. Across the board, it looks like you can expect, again, I'm looking at the very, very last minute, like 0 to 6 days. It looks like on average, I would say probably 35 to 38% of your bookings are going to come super last minute. This also does change depending on the size of property you get. If you get a larger home, like I would say anything 4 bedroom plus, the chances of last minutes are a lot less likely, but you're a lot more likely to get bigger stays farther out. But obviously, if you have a, you know, 5, 6 bedroom property, most people who book very last minute are going to be guests of, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people. They don't need such a large home. But where you're going to make up for that is in these premium prices 90 plus days in advance. Okay, so pretty good seasonality throughout the year. We have about 10, 11 months or 9 to 10 months of a year that have pretty good occupancy. So now let's go to actual occupancy. Same, we have about 64%. So I would say I have no doubt that you guys can do at least 70%, if not 75 on average. I'm talking about on average. Florida, these markets like the beach areas, like Bradenton, like Fort Lauderdale, they are going to be some of the longest length of stays. The average length of stay for the area are going to be longer than Colorado would be, as they're much more vacation markets where people are going for, you know, 5 to 7 days or even, sometimes a couple weeks. Okay, so just setting expectations, we're looking at about 65, 70% for occupancy. So now let's go and identify what makes a top percent property. Okay, this there's two sides, but this is something that I noticed right here is that a lot of these really high revenue properties have not that many reviews, 38, 31, 64, 37, 29 reviews. There's a couple that have a couple hundred. So I'm gonna kind of what I noticed in some of these beach markets is because they'll a lot of them will only open up for certain times of the year. And so I just want to see, I want to test this theory real quick. So they actually only have 22 on Airbnb. The other ones could be on Vervo. Okay, so as you notice, we're looking at the most recent reviews. Most recent is July, and then it jumps to September. So they had a whole 8 months or whatever of not getting any reviews, which tells me they didn't get any bookings. They were probably shut down for that entire time. So when it says that they're making almost $600,000 or, $564,000, do not believe it. They are, what has happened is they were either blocked or they had their property unlisted. AirDNA is assuming that they were booked and they're taking those nightly rates that they saw and they're assuming that they were booked the whole time. They're calculating that. So this is extremely inflated. So a lot of the time, when you see these really, really, really high revenue properties, they're not very accurate. So I bet if we looked at all of these ones that had between that range of, 30 to 70 reviews, they would more than likely be have a lot of missing reviews within them. Okay, let's look at these ones. These ones make sense. You have to, a lot of time you in this, you have to think about what makes sense. And when you look at this as often as I do, it's very clear, like, that this property is not making them $600,000 a year unless it has like 6 bedrooms or like six, like it's a hotel or a motel. So these properties, I mean, anywhere in any market, a property like this is going to do really well. It looks amazing. These are the people you want to compete with. I bet if you looked at, and they're all 4 bedrooms. I've noticed 4 bedrooms in a lot of the markets have been kind of the sweet spot. A lot of people, when I talked about when single family homes got really popular, everyone started going towards 3 bedrooms. Now, 3 bedrooms there's a lot of them in a lot of markets. You can still compete, but it's a lot harder. But if we go into this, they will more than likely have a review for at least one review for every single month. Go to most recent, August, July, June. They're missing May, April. Oh, they're missing quite a few. That's disappointing. So if this were me, I would not utilize this as a comp. If they do not have at least a review per month, then that tells me that Top properties always, almost always have a review, at least one review per month. If they're getting anywhere from at least 4 to 6 stays, they at least one of those are gonna result in a review, especially if they have a good strategy. So the fact that these are missing many months tells me that the estimated revenue potential is extremely inflated. So let's go back. So I like to look at reviews always. So that kind of makes sense. These ones are claiming to make, 175, 180, then all of a sudden drops to 144. There's multiple properties that are making this 149, 144, 143, 153. So let's look at these ones have consistent reviews. I should have kept their, is it the same property? I must have clicked on the wrong property. There we go. Okay, so we have August, June, we are missing July. So June, May, April, March, July, missing February, missing December, October. A little bit more consistent. We are missing about 3 months in the last 12 months. I would say that's the absolute like minimum I would go. I would not allow any more than 3 missing months. Still doesn't make me feel super confident. So this is all important when you're determining like what kind of property you're going to get in the market, because just because these properties claim to make this, obviously we like they're taking this, the way that AirDNA is determining potential revenue or the revenue they're making is they're going on to your public listing. They're saying, okay, these next 3 days are $100, each night, and then the cleaning fee they used to determine cleaning fee. Now they're looking at total price. So like, okay, for these 3 days, total price is $600. So if somebody books that, it's $600, and they're assuming that your out of multiple of those, that your average daily rate is $600 now. So then they go back and they determine, okay, based on that and what we see your occupancy has been so far, which is let's say on average 70%. So we're taking, $600 and um what's 70% of the year? 270 days or something. Anyways, they're multiplying it by 70 days or 70% of the year to determine what your annual revenue potential is going to be. And they do say that they have some seasonality factor in that, some demand factor, to understand that if you've only been listed live through your slow season, you still have high season coming up, it will take that into consideration. So typically on average, 20 reviews is bare minimum for a property that's doing well to have per year. So most properties that have at least 20 reviews have been active for at least a year. I would say a really good top 10% property more than likely has closer to 40, 50, even 60 reviews. Okay, so now we're dropping down into these 130 range. So let's start looking at location. Now we're getting closer to properties that are comps that are a little bit more reliable. This is why even for me, even though I look at properties all day long and I do the underwriting for them, I would come in here and I would assume that these are doing fantastic and they probably are doing really well, but I cannot bank on these numbers because they don't have the consistent data behind them. So even though, like, on the top of my head, I want to say these are great, I should just go with it. Who cares? I have to trust the data just like I teach you guys to do. Okay, totally. If this were me, I would go through probably every single one of these properties that are within the range that I need to make, and I'd look through all of their reviews, and I'd go determine which ones are really. I'd save them to my wish list, or I'd add them to a comp set. In AirDNA, you can save them to a comp set and then go through and look at location. Obviously, we don't have time for that, so we'll see from here. And it looks like a lot of these between the 130 range to 110 range are just between this Neptune Beach and this South Beach Park and playground. So somewhere within this area. And what you notice too on markets like this is, are they beachfront properties, or are they, can they be on the west side of this 31st Street? Because obviously you don't want to be, if you don't have a property on the beach, you're not going to compare to properties on the beach and vice versa. So a lot of these look like they're not directly on the beach, they're right off of it, which is good. Okay, so it looks like we can look at probably any properties within this area. And now that we're looking at, let's say that I've gone through all of these, I've determined, okay, these are all really solid properties. I trust AirDNA's data on this. Then I would go through and be like, okay, what's some common factors with all of them? There's a lot of four bedrooms in here. There's a couple, at least one, three. Well, really, is only like one, three that's making more. So I imagine I'd look into this. A lot of the time, if there's outliers, there's a reason. Um, so this person supposedly has 200 five-star reviews. I'm interested to see if that's true. Especially, I'm going to keep pointing out things that I notice, but they have a very, very bland title. They have a nice cover photo. The property looks great, but it's pretty bland. So for a three-bedroom to be competing with 4 and 5 bedrooms, even though they only have 8 people and they're making $40,000 more than most three-bedrooms, something's a little bit off. But sometimes I'm wrong too. So July, June, May, April, March, February, January, December, October. So this person, the only month they're missing is November, I believe. So based on what I'm seeing there, like, let's look. Hold on, one more thing. They said they had 200 five-star reviews. There could be a chance that the remainder of the reviews are on Verbo. Yep, looks like it was, yeah, it kind of adds up. It's not going to be perfect. Again, these AirDNA price labs, none of them are 100%. So if they're close, that's pretty good. I don't love the idea of using this and thinking that, okay, a three-bedroom can make 150, even though it's showing the data seems to be accurate. It's a major outlier. There's very, very few, if not no other three-bedrooms making anywhere close to that number. So I would not use that if I were you. But we do have consistent 4 bedrooms and 5 bedrooms that are making that. So you drop below the 100,000 or right 105,000 and lower, you start getting into those 3 bedrooms. So looks like 100,000 to 130,000. We have 4 and 5 bedrooms are really popular. Another common theme, obviously, they have pools. Another big and major revenue driver are not just pools, but heated pools. Do they have heated pools? If you go, I see this one right here, heated pool. This one, I promise you that says heated pool, with pool. If they don't say heated pool in the title, a lot of them will say it in their description. This is a I would okay, in general, in Airbnbs in any market, a pool will probably on average make a $20,000 difference in revenue. Heated pool in there will probably drop that 20,000 down to 10,000. It makes a big difference in revenue. So this property says it has a pool, does not specify that it has a heated pool in the title. So what I like to look for is, are they charging? I'm not sure what this person is doing. They seem to have multiple properties, but okay. So let's look. They're charging for a lot of different things. $500 cleaning fee in addition to regular cleaning fee. Early arrival, fees. If your description looks like this, you are definitely deterring people from staying at your property if they just see a ton of warnings. Pet fee, 250. So this property, I do not see that it specifies a heated pool. So typically that means that they do not have a heated pool or offer one. But if you can only find comps, if a majority of your comps have one, I highly recommend getting a property with one or adding it to your budget that you will be adding a heater to the pool. So we want 4 or 5 bedrooms, slightly off the beach, with a pool. We have to determine, do we want it heated or not? And what other experiences are they offering? Are they offering hot tubs? Are they offering games? Are they offering theaters? What are they offering? If they're not offering any of those, then you don't have to add them. If nobody in the area is offering, a game room and I don't know, if no one in the area is offering a game room, you do not have to add a game room. All it is extra. That's all it's doing. But if you know that you can hit that $130,000 mark by having that 5 bedroom with a pool, it's heated, and it has a great design that competes with the competitors that you're looking at, that's all that matters. Okay, so we're a little bit over time here. I hope that wasn't confusing. But just remember, go through regulations first. Don't waste your time looking at the market until you look at regulations and market performance, um, saturation, seasonality, lead time, occupancy. Those are 4 big ones that matter to me when I go into a market, just to set expectations, identifying the top properties and what they have in common. Biggest one is how many rooms, then it's sleep count, then it's what major amenities do they have. Next, find it on Zillow, make sure the price range is right, and then put in an offer. This works the same way for arbitrage as well. The only thing that's harder about arbitrage is you have to get the owner to agree to the model. So then once you go through all of this on arbitrage, you find that property, you just start making calls. Find a bunch of those, make a bunch of calls. But all right. I hope to see you guys on Wednesday's call. I'll talk to you later.